Hi class. Today in this section I will be talking about one of the most interesting countries in the world, which is Russia. Russia, of course, is what remains nowadays of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which was dissolved in 1991. Still, it remains the largest country in the world with very interesting history, with a very interesting population, very literate population. Its media have gone through some dramatic changes, and I can tell you my personal take on Russian media. In mid 1980s, when I was my teenage and late teenage formative years, Russian media were undergoing something that was known as glasnost, or basically opening, basically the ability to talk about issues that were not discussed openly before. Mikhail Gorbachev, who became the leader in 1985, did two things. He started doing something that was known as perestroika, which roughly means change or transition. He was trying to switch the model that Russian economy and Russian society, politics was following. And also in parallel, he instituted the aforementioned glasnost. So during that time, mid 80s, Russian media or Soviet media became much more open. Topics, as I said, that were not discussed before suddenly became permissible in the media, because until then, the journalists in Russia, the media in Russia, were basically tools of propaganda, nothing more. They were not about the news. They were not about really informing the population. They were about indoctrinating the population. That was it. So during this period, when media started discussing, topics about history, about politics, about the economy of the country, about the world, in a very different way, lots of free, brave, talented voices appeared, and the media of the Soviet Union at the time were basically the envy of the rest of the socialist or communist countries, including Bulgaria. Because Bulgarian media were not discussing these topics. There was no such openness in the Bulgarian media at the time. I was a voracious reader of Russian newspapers and magazines. I was watching Russian TV, which was transmitted into Bulgaria at the time. It was very interesting. It was a roller coaster of new experiences and new voices, new takes on history, politics, society, and so on, as I said. Now, with the fall of the Berlin Wall in the November of 1989 and subsequent year or two, of course, media in Bulgaria underwent their own very rapid transformation and became free from completely government dominated. For instance, for the newspapers, 100% government owned, they became 100% privately owned, and very different media environment. So Bulgaria quickly caught up, as was the case with all other socialist countries, the ones that were on the other side of the Iron Curtain, so to speak, with the fall of the Berlin Wall. So they caught up and even surpassed in many ways the level of free discussion that we saw in Russian/Soviet media at the time. But of course, even with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 91, Russian media were not standing still. They were developing, and I would say that mid 90s as well were a very good period for Russian journalism. Lots of independent voices, lots of stories, lots of new media emerged, and very interesting to read, very interesting to watch all the programs. The internet was emerging concurrently at the time, so you did not have to subscribe to a Russian newspaper anymore in order to be able to read it. You could look at the website and so on and so on. So very interesting, very rapid transformation from mid 80s to about mid 90s. Unfortunately, at the end of this decade, with the coming to power of Vladimir Putin as a president in late 1999, so 2000, things started changing. One of the big successes, so to speak, of his administration has been the ability to co-opt many of these free media voices, many of the journalists, many of the channels and the outlets in Russia. Russia today, and that, coincidentally, there's also a name of a very popular, very big propaganda channel that's available in the United States, largely from YouTube. But Russia today has media that are heavily reliant on television. There are three main TV channels and a number of independent channels, but the ones that are the main channels are really controlled by the Kremlin, by the government. Same situation exists with print media, with newspapers. The largest ones are controlled and dominated by the government through a variety of means. And there are many ways to control media. In the TV channels, you can there's power to appoint the boards that govern them, the directors, sometimes all the way down to producers. But most of the methods are more insidious. I mean, for instance, large corporations such as Gazprom, which is the biggest energy company in the world. If you are in the government, you can direct where they send their advertising, which media they support with their advertising money, funds, and which media they don't. There can be direct intimidation, including through tax audits of media that are considered not favorable to the government, and so on, and so on, and so on. As a result of all this, media in Russia have been ranked in terms of freedom as 148th out of 179 countries by Reporters Without Borders. That's 2013 ranking. Freedom House, another organization that ranks media systems in the world in terms of the degree of their openness and freedom, ranks Russia 176 out of 197 countries in the world. So very close to the bottom of this table. Committee to Protect Journalists has expressed concerns about killings of journalists in Russia. I believe Russia ranks as number 9 or 10 in the world in the numbers of journalists killed with impunity. There have been attacks on journalists, including in small media, journalists who wrote something about the local mayor, and they have been attacked with like sulfuric acid splashed into their eyes, or beaten up by some thugs, and so on and so on. All those are very unfortunate developments, and I'm very saddened by the fact that Russian media are really not as free as they could be or as they should be, given the number of extremely talented professionals that work in this media, given the high literacy among the population. But unfortunately, that's a fact. Yes, in Russia you can access media on the internet, so you can access all kinds of voices through the internet. But the problem is that they are marginalized. When the major TV channels, when the major newspapers are towing the same line, when they have the same talking points regarding, say, the United States, regarding the European Union, and so on. And you see in some of the readings what these talking points exactly are. Then it is very difficult to counter this type of media that are reaching, pretty much 90% of the audience. They are the major players in the Russian media scene. So, for instance, independent TV channels like TV Rain, uh, there are very interesting, and their viewpoints, their way that they cover the events might be quite different from what the Kremlin thinks is the correct viewpoint. But again, they are marginalized. They can be accessed by people freely, but not everywhere, and they do not have a wide enough audience to make much of a change or much of a difference. Among the interesting developments that happened in Russian media in the first decade of the 21st century have been the spread of Kremlin-funded, basically propaganda channels such as RT or Russia Today, who have been able to hire some enormous talent to work for them, including former reporters for the BBC, former reporters for CNN, people like Larry King, and so on. And presents a very sleek package that mixes information in ways that are favored by the Kremlin administration. You will see again in the readings how this happens exactly, but it's a very professional, very well organized media outlet. They are the largest media outlet in terms of numbers of people who work for them outside, on outside politics, even ahead of the BBC, which is the largest media outlet in the world. Period. Lots of opinions exist on Russian media, and you have some interesting reading presented in the chapter, in the additional readings. My esteemed colleague, Professor Alexander Kazakov from Saratov University, is talking about his own take on Russian media. It's very important for you to take all the readings as a whole, to look at the Russian media as a complex system, to try to understand some of the various forces that drive them. Again, the chapter reading and the additional readings will help you get a basic understanding or basic grasp of what's going on in Russian media. My own perspective is, as I just laid it out, it's not the only way to look at Russian media. But for me, the fact remains that I'm saddened by how far the free, open, vibrant, vivacious media of mid-80s to mid-90s have gone in terms of being dominated by one viewpoint, in terms of being subservient to the government, and really eliminating the ability of Russian people to see a diversity of viewpoints as they should.